Society is in every corner of our lives. Our relationships, communication, rules, symbolism, all the things that bind us together. What's behind it? Why do we become so social? Could it have something to do with another innovation? Something unprecedented in our evolution. Building fires and cooking.
Here we've got erectus, the first species that looks like us. And I think only cooking can explain the magnitude of this change.
The earliest evidence that our ancestors deliberately used fire for cooking dates to long after Turkana time. But Richard Wrangham is sure Homo erectus was building fires much earlier.
Now, for the first time, we had a species that was committed to living on the ground because they lose their climbing adaptations. Well, how were they sleeping? They had to be able to protect themselves from wild animals.
On the African savanna, full of predators who hunt by night, Richard believes Turkana and his people couldn't have survived without fire. And he thinks only cooking, which makes food more soft and digestible, can explain why Homo erectus evolved smaller teeth and a much smaller gut.
These things are compatible with the reduced cost of digestion produced by cooking food. Nothing else is.
As our ancestors reaped the benefits of cooking, something else happened too, at least according to Wrangham. We became more social.
Humans have this wonderfully calm temperament compared to chimpanzees, say. Where did it come from? We were drawn to a common place, the fireplace.
Wrangham believes we learn to share and communicate, sitting around fires, waiting for food to cook. It's speculative, but one thing is for sure. In the Homo erectus world, new social relationships had to be evolving. The bonds between mothers and children must have been very different from the apes.
For example, a mother orangutan will not allow any other individual to take her infant, will be in constant skin-to-skin contact with that baby for at least the first 6 months of life, not a moment out of contact.
Secure in this unbreakable mother-infant bond, ape babies need less capacity to read the intentions of others than human babies, whose bond with their mothers is surprisingly less secure. The shocking fact is that human mothers abandon their infants much more often than ape mothers. Infanticide by a mother is more common among humans than any other higher ape.
Maternal commitment is a lot more contingent in humans than it seems to be in other apes.
Unlike most primates, human mothers share parenting with others. A child's survival can depend on making itself appealing to a number of caregivers. Perhaps that's why human infants have evolved a uniquely acute sensitivity.
Human infants are born connoisseurs of mothers, reading her facial expression, looking for signs of commitment.
We are born hardwired with an awareness of the intentions and emotions of others, which is unique in the animal world.
When did humans develop this gift for attributing mental states and feelings to others and for caring about what others thought about them?
Could these social instincts have developed with Homo erectus? Along with cooperative hunting, bigger brains, longer childhoods, and the use of fire. Perhaps Turkana and his people already had social skills that would be familiar to us. Here were intelligent social beings with an increasing capacity for cooperation. It may be this that made possible another great achievement, the exodus from Africa. For millions of years, our earliest ancestors stayed on the African savannas. But at some point, they started to leave. Ancient fossil skulls and tools have been found as far away as China and Indonesia. The question is, when did they leave Africa and why? When Turkana Boy was found, scientists thought they had the answer. Here was a strong, large-brained ancestor capable of an arduous migration. He had the look of a world conqueror.
In the mid-1980s, we were thinking that a hominid like this one had left Africa, but had done it maybe about 1 million years ago.
For decades, scientists believed big strapping humans like Turkana Boy left Africa 1 million years ago. But new discoveries are showing the migration may have started a lot earlier than that. Dmanisi, Georgia. The mountains and plains of the Caucasus, thousands of miles from the Great Rift Valley, had never produced any fossils of early human ancestors. But then, an astonishing discovery was made.
It was a lower jaw with teeth downward, this way in the ground. So when I started to clean, those front teeth came to light. It became obvious to me that we had found some kind of hominid. But what kind?
The jaw seemed to be a primitive form of Homo erectus. But at first, hardly anyone believed it.
In '91, when we found this jaw, a lot of scientists were quite skeptical about it. Because it was very hard to imagine Georgia, Caucasus, to be on the map of the human evolution.
Since then, Dmanisi has been put on the map of human evolution in a big way. The site has turned up a treasure trove of Homo erectus fossils. They've transformed our understanding of who left Africa and when. They showed that the first humans to leave Africa were much more primitive than Turkana Boy.
People thought that hominids that left Africa were very tall, like Turkana Boy, with big brains, advanced technology, and Dmanisi proved the opposite.
At 4.5 feet tall, they were smaller than Turkana Boy, with more ape-like shoulders and a simple stone technology.
They are much more primitive, they have small brains, and at the same time they were using very primitive stone tools.
The next surprise came when they dated the site. The ancient Dmanisi landscape has been built up layer by layer over millions of years. 1.81 million years ago, massive volcanic eruptions deposited a layer of ash. The fossils sat on top of this ash, so must have been slightly younger, around 1.8 million years old. To the vast majority of scientists who believe that all our ancestors evolved in Africa, this was a stunning surprise. How had a small, primitive Homo erectus migrated to the Caucasus almost 2 million years ago, long before Turkana Boy? Scientists now accept that as soon as Homo erectus appeared on the savannas of Africa, they started to leave.
Suddenly, with the origin of Homo erectus, we get this shift in body shape, and then boom, they're out of Africa right away.
The Georgia fossils proved that Homo erectus left Africa much earlier than previously thought. An even more provocative find shows the migration may have started even earlier. 5,000 miles from Africa, the island of Flores, Indonesia. In 2003, researchers made a discovery so strange, nobody knew what to make of it. They found the bones of a tiny human ancestor, just over 3 feet tall, even smaller than the Dmanisi fossils. They called this baffling new ancestor Homo floresiensis, and because of its tiny size, nicknamed it the Hobbit.
And this has created a tremendous amount of grief because we're not really sure what we're seeing here. The size of the Hobbit brain endocast is roughly 400 cc's.
That's barely bigger than the brain of Lucy, the famous bipedal ape from 3 million years ago.
It's not just a small brain and a primitive-looking face, but the foot's primitive, the hand's primitive, the leg is primitive.
The lower limb is very much like the Lucy skeleton. That was a big surprise.
And in the cave where this primitive creature was found, they also uncovered stone tools, something Lucy never had.
People have for a long time said, well, you need a big brain to make stone tools. Well, okay, if Homo floresiensis is making stone tools, this creature has the brain the size of an orange. Clearly that equation's gone.
Everything about these creatures is an enigma. Where did they come from? And what were they?
Some researchers have argued that floresiensis is just a dwarfed population of modern people that suffered some kind of disease that caused them to both dwarf and have relatively small brains.
But when scientists took a closer look, most saw no evidence of disease. The stone tools and the shape of the face moved the focus to our old friend, Homo erectus.
Some researchers think that Homo floresiensis evolved from Homo erectus.
But how did they get so small? Something called island dwarfism may be the answer. Isolated on islands with limited food, large mammals sometimes shrink over time. On Flores, there were once pygmy elephants the size of cows. Could the same evolutionary pressure have acted on Homo erectus to produce the Hobbit? Or was this mysterious creature descended from an even more primitive ancestor?
So perhaps we're sampling a period which is at the very beginning of the Homo lineage.
So whatever the Hobbit was, perhaps its ancestors were the very first wave of migration out of Africa. Some unknown creature, part bipedal ape like Lucy, and part Homo erectus.
So if that's the case, then what we see in Indonesia makes sense. It's kind of a body that existed before human bodies became more modern.
What would push such primitive creatures out of Africa? A key driving force behind the migration was probably a climate shift, which spread grasslands from Africa into Asia. And with the grasses went the game animals.
Animals are going to be moving out of Africa, and the hominids will just be keeping pace with those animals. After all, that's their livelihood.
Of course, our ancestors didn't know they were leaving Africa. They just followed the animals they depended on, through the Sinai up into the Middle East and beyond. It's often been called an exodus, but it really wasn't like that.
When people think of Exodus, they think of the Bible, or they think of migration, they think of Europeans coming over here to the New World. It probably wasn't like any historical migration, this dispersal of humans out of Africa.
The process was probably very, very slow, much like the spread of any other animal species into new territories.
You could imagine a group of Homo erectus moving their range 1 kilometer a year in one direction, and doing that continually over a long enough period of time, you can get the distance from Africa to Indonesia covered in, say, 15,000 years.
By 1 million years ago, our ancestors had populated Asia from the Caucasus to Indonesia. And they were in Europe, too.